Alright, hello everyone! Welcome to the Force 13 live stream today, covering all the activity in the tropics that we're dealing with right now. There is surely a lot of it as we speak. We are joined by the team here in Discord today. Why don't you guys introduce yourselves?
Good evening, good afternoon. And
hello, my name is Marcelo, and I am the guy of the models.
Alright, we have Marcel, Isaac, Cesar, David, and Orlando. How are you guys all doing tonight?
Alright. Fine, good to be here.
Alright, great to hear. So we do have a lot going on, don't we, David? Do you have some imagery on Shanshan that you want to show us some local areas of Japan?
Quite good evening from South Texas.
Not at this point in time, I'm still bringing it up, but what I can do is show a live webcam shot of the Tokyo region.
Alright.
And it should be there now.
Alright, so here's the live shot of the Tokyo region right now. Shanshan is just off the coast right now. Fortunately, most of the rain's actually on the east side of the system, so there isn't really as much rain in the region, which is pretty nice to see. Shanshan has kind of maintained its strength somehow in the past couple of days. It was expected originally to be weaker at this point in time. What do you guys have to take on the system at the moment?
Well, it's a pretty interesting system, of course. There's a possible risk of landfall. The system right now is passing very close to Katsura. I think it's Katsura in Japan. It's a Category 1 typhoon, expected of course to be absorbed in the next few days, but right now it's affecting with some rains and winds this part of Japan, and possibly it could be a significant situation for the people living there. If I remember well, the system was expected to be stronger, but of course it didn't happen, fortunately. I don't know. But what do you have what do you have to say, guys? I mean, it's interesting that a typhoon is making landfall in, well, not making landfall, but it's pretty close to this particular part of Japan, and most of the systems practically travel in the, like, between Nagasaki and those islands in the south of Japan.
And so the storm is like off the coast of the Ibaraki prefecture, Shanshan. And you can see the loop here.
Yeah, Hank was mentioning, it was 2 days ago, that this is the time of year you'll see a type of steering pattern that'll bring a storm like Shanshan or Jangdari in this motion, but it is pretty rare to see a storm approach Japan from the east, either making landfall going through like Jangdari or staying really close to the coast and making a close approach to landfall at this latitude, really. but like you said, this is the time of year for it to happen. Storm right now is 70 knot winds, if I'm not mistaken. I can double check that right now for everyone.
Yeah,
Let me
it's
check
70
that.
knots.
70 knots, and what's the pressure again on it?
975, if I'm not wrong.
Yeah, I'm checking right now.
It
says 967. I don't know if that's right. Probably is a bit higher at this point.
And actually, it's a very similar scenario, comparing it to Typhoon Shanshan that happened the last week. Of course, the track of those systems were totally the opposite, but the location, specifically the location that is currently Shanshan, is practically similar to Jongdari that happened the last week when actually Jongdari made landfall as a category 1 typhoon. So it's it has been pretty interesting how those systems have been behaving in those weeks, because in practically in this period we are seeing more intense storms are and in much lower latitudes, but right now we are watching a lot of systems that have formed in very high latitudes. Examples, or well or have intensified in very high latitudes. Examples: Kong and the tropical depression 16W. Now Shanshan, we have, and now Yagi that it will have some same situation, but that's another stuff. So
Yes.
so practically this system is interesting to watch, and of course hopefully the people there in Japan is taking all the precautions that is needed to be protected. You know.
Speaking of high latitude systems, we also have tropical storm Debby out there in the north central Atlantic Ocean right now. It's currently has 40-mile-an-hour winds, a pretty high pressure, 1,004 millibars, and it's starting to get torn up a bit as it's becoming more elongated. Storm's starting to move to the northeast. What do you guys think of that? Because initially we were looking at the models before Nathan left for his vacation. We weren't really expecting anything. This thing was actually down to a 20% chance of formation the day it actually formed earlier in the day. So what do we think seeing a third storm at this point of the year forming from non-tropical origins?
That's impressive, to be honest. But of course, it's really strange that well, Debby particularly was very strange because, as you said, had practically very low percentage of formation. Unexpectedly, it formed. Now it's a very high latitude, dissipating probably, and but that means that the whole season itself has been kinda inactive, to be honest. Only four named, and we are 1 month to the peak intensity of the season, and the only one when we only had one storm that had formed as with tropical origins, that it has been Beryl. Well, Alberto, I think, was as well. I don't remember too, but
Yeah,
that's
Alberto was actually subtropical initially. It was what was it? It was the second furthest south subtropical system on record.
exactly. It was the second lowest storm latitude as a subtropical system. Pretty rare, to be honest, in that such location, but the data explains everything. It formed before the season, before the official start of the season. It was a very interesting storm to watch. And then Barrett was, as I said before, the few well, the only, if I'm not wrong, the only tropical system in the Atlantic that have formed as a tropical low, and very more unexpected was its intensification. Of course, it's high pressure, it's very small size, and practically the conditions in the Atlantic in general has been very, very, very bad to support any formation tropical cyclogenesis. We are having very, very high levels of Saharan dust in very, very large parts of the whole Atlantic.
Yeah, it's fortunate to see this
So
time of year the Saharan air layer still holding as strong as it is. It's really limiting the main development region along with the colder temperatures than we've seen the past couple of years in the main development region as well.
that's correct. And but I don't know if it's if in the next weeks it will be like a bad situation because the energy I think it's being like accumulated as not as the storms are not forming thanks to those conditions and the Saharan dust itself.
Since we're like on about the MDR right now, the main development region. I believe I checked earlier today that the water temperature in the region is around normal.
It's around normal at this point now?
Yes, if someone could pull it up, but at least by Tropical Tidbits graph, it's near normal.
Take a quick pull of that. It does look to be closer to average now. I know, was it a couple of weeks ago? It was pretty cool, but it started to warm back up again, getting closer to
right now
near
it's
average.
probably like probably 0.1 degrees below, maybe at most. Oh yeah, it's negative 0.1.
Yeah. And speaking of other storms in the world right now, we have Hurricane Hector moving in the Pacific Ocean, Central Pacific, just south of Hawaii. There was actually tropical storm warnings in Hawaii earlier today as the system passed to the south. It's weakened considerably in appearance on satellite imagery since yesterday. It's down to 115 miles an hour from peaking yesterday at 155. It was pretty close to Category 5 yesterday, but people in the chat were asking if it got there. No, it did not get to Category 5 intensity. It was close at certain points, though. What are we looking at, you guys, with thinking about the system over its history and the chance that it's getting to the Western Pacific? Orlando, what do you think about that?
I was a little caught off track for a brief moment. May you repeat the question?
Yeah, I was saying, what do you guys think about how Hurricane Hector is getting towards and likely will get to the Western Pacific Ocean?
I think it's very fascinating. It happens not too oftenly, especially at this intensity as well. But it has happened before, and it's probably going to be an interesting sight, to say the least. Fortunately, as far as I'm aware, it's not going to affect land, but who knows? It probably might pass over a small island in the middle of the ocean, or alternatively, just churn up the seas a bit and make life a problem for marine life.
Yeah, David, I know you've been looking at Hector a good bit earlier today. What are you thinking about it in general?
The track remains interesting. The tropical storm warning for Hawaii County has been discontinued. However, the interest on Johnson Island should continue monitoring the progress of the hurricane, and he's down to Cat 3, winds near 115 miles per hour, 185 kilometers an hour. Stronger gusts, slight weakening is forecast during the next couple of days, and I haven't had a chance to read the NHC's technical information, so
I'll go read it off right now, actually, then.
Alright, I'll have a look at the Joint Typhoon Warning Center to see if they've got anything.
Here's what the Central Pacific Hurricane Center in Honolulu is saying about the storm as of 5 p.m. Eastern, 11 a.m. Hawaii time. It says that Hector's satellite presentation has fluctuated since the previous advisory, with the eye briefly becoming indiscernible in traditional infrared imagery before appearing again The U.S. Air Force 53rd Weather Reconnaissance Squadron has been penetrating Hector's core this morning and found some decrease in the observed winds, with maximum flight level winds of 106 knots. While the surface pressure changed little since last night based on a combination of the aircraft data and subjective and objective satellite-based intensity estimates, the initial intensity for this advisory is set at 100 knots, with Hector maintaining major hurricane status. So the storm has actually weakened overall over 20 millibars in the past couple of days. I'll actually pull up the radar again of the system as it passes south of Hawaii. Here it is right here. It should be up on the screen any second now. And you can see it actually looks like it's going through an eyewall replacement cycle right now, which may have had a role to play in the weakening of the system over the past day or so. It is still a pretty compact system. It peaked, when it peaked, it did have somewhat annular characteristics, which have kind of dissipated more at this point as the storms become less symmetrical, per se. Of course, high seas are still a condition problem. It's interesting to look forward with the storm because some of the models actually predict if it survives more than 5 days out, which the Central Pacific Hurricane Center does indicate that it will while maintaining hurricane status. That some of the models, the GFS in particular, are showing that as it gets towards the Western Pacific, it will re-intensify back into potentially a major hurricane.
And it's currently located 194 nautical miles south of Hilo, tracking westward at 13 knots, and wave height is 30 feet.
Yep. Yeah.
So it's going to. Sorry, Australia. Looking at the JTWC's forecast track, it looks like it will. Well, the Midway Island is now in the cone of uncertainty, and will probably cross the Johnson Atoll. So that's an update to the people on that island. We'll have to continue maintaining, but I think the environmental conditions remain favourable. I haven't looked at the wind shear for the region.
Yeah, I think what was said on the forecast advisory is that even though wind shear should remain marginal, it's going to be encountering a more stable air mass, which will help contribute to the weakening of the system over the next couple of days. It should be very gradual, though, as 5 days out from now, they're saying the storm's only going to have weakened to 90 miles an hour sustained winds from 115 now. The storm is definitely something that's being a huge ace maker long run with this thing, and especially maintaining its latitude. It's been at a pretty decent intensity for quite a while now.
Oh, okay. I think if this storm if this is Hector maintains its altitude and it income, and if he finds more warm waters and better conditions for formation, I think it could re-intensify.
Yeah, you can see to the top of the screen, near the top of the screen, top right center of the screen right now, that is the current GFS run forecast for Hurricane Hector over the next week or so. It does show in general a weakening of the storm, but it keeps it at a pretty decently low latitude. You can see it's 7 days out. It's entering the Western Pacific at that point. It's very, very far away from any other significant landmass at that point. And as it enters the Western Pacific, there should be a steering current with a trough trying to pick it up to bring it back to the north and northeast. But it's really too far out to say anything right now. It is expected to be a hurricane a week out from now, according to most of the computer models. And that leads to the question of what could happen further out in time. But that's, obviously way too far out to say anything. By the way, guys, if you have any questions, make sure to leave them in chat. We'll do our best to answer them right now. We have 3 other storms that we haven't even touched yet right now. We also have Hurricane John, just west-southwest of Cabo San Lucas in the southern tip of the Baja Peninsula. That's been delivering some pretty harsh conditions there for the past day or so, with its outer bands and the remnants of Ileana, which were absorbed into the system. I know the National Hurricane Center originally anticipated John to be at a much greater intensity at this point than they did. So where do you guys think John really kind of hit a rough spot and didn't really reach its stride? David?
I haven't really been looking at the other systems, but Shanshan and Hector. Sorry, I'm just switching. Well, have a look at wind shear, Strat. Apology.
Yeah. No, it's all good.
There's quite a bit of activity, as Strat said, and trying to bring everything up. Okay. Wind shear, you can actually see what's going on over there in the East Pack, and you've got Hector, and when you look at the wind shear, this is a shear tendency, it's fairly good, and there's the wind shear. Quite a bit of red, which is the unfavourable, but where the systems are, the environment's low wind shear.
Yeah, I was going to say, where all the systems are right now, they're in low to marginal conditions of wind shear. So you would expect them to be doing better than what they're doing right now. Hector obviously is still a strong system. It's maintaining major hurricane status. It has done so for about 4 days now, if I'm not mistaken. But it makes you question why John hasn't really gotten his act together and failed to do so over the past few days. You know, bottom left corner of the screen right now, that's Hurricane John as we speak. It's only at 85-mile-an-hour sustained winds, and it's in an area of virtually no shear. It doesn't really have particularly dry air around it either, so it's kind of surprising to have seen it fail to really perform at all in the past 2 days, especially since it was initially expected to do much better. Cesar, you've probably been keeping track of John a little bit over the past few days, right? Or Marcel, what do you think?
So I think I have said it. I have said it. Actually, if it stays at the lower latitude, below like 20 north, it can intensify.
Yeah, what are you thinking about Hurricane John?
I think John is in the last legs. I think it will dissipate like in 1 or 2 days.
Yeah.
For me.
Was it surprising to you at all that it didn't really reach a further intensity considering the favorable conditions around it?
Yeah.
Because, 2 days ago, the National Hurricane Center's kind of been pretty off with John in Ileana. They said that Ileana would become a hurricane at one point, actually, and then the next advisory they said it would dissipate within 24 hours because John absorbed the system. And then they were saying John would become a major hurricane, almost Category 4, and it's completely fell in on itself. You know, you can't really even see a distinct eye on satellite imagery very well. You could probably try to pinpoint one, but it's really nothing in retrospect. So, you know, and I feel like, you know, a similar thing's happening with Kristy. That's going to be the right center satellite imagery on the screen here. It's just, you know, both of these storms have really underperformed to what they could have. The National Hurricane Center was saying that Kristy would become a hurricane. It's redacted that at this point and says it will pretty much dissipate within the next 5 days, not maintaining any organization that they really thought it would initially. So seeing these two storms out there, like Hank said yesterday, or 2 days ago, you don't discount the Eastern Pacific because of an inactive July. Of course, right here, the first week of August, entering the second week, things have kicked up tremendously. We had 4 Eastern Pacific storms active at once 2 days ago, along with two systems in the Western Pacific and one in the Atlantic as well. What's it? Orlando, what are you thinking with these 2 Eastern Pacific storms in terms of how they performed?
Personally, I think it's just an average, I guess, because we've seen on many occasions things like this happen, and variants, of course, might be less often than others, but nonetheless, it's nothing really surprising.
Yeah, and I just saw a question in chat up here about Hector. They're asking what its forecast path is, change, and what category is it. Hector is currently a Category 3 storm with 115 mile-an-hour winds and 959 millibars. It's expected to move due west for the next 2 days before slowly curving to the west-northwest by days 3 to 5, staying below 25 degrees north the whole time. If you actually look at the top of the screen, just to the left of my face, you can actually see the GFS 7-day forecast for Hector. You can see it stays on the screen. It's going to be entering the Western Pacific at that time, but it maintains a pretty good structured system of hurricane status according to the model at that time. And Orlando, what are you thinking about? I know we haven't even mentioned 18W yet, Yagi. I think we can all tell it's heavily sheared. It's not looking in any condition that we could say favorable at all. What are we looking at in terms of that system?
Personally, I think that storm's. I'm not very familiar with that storm as of yet, but I don't think I expect anything much different.
Yeah, it's just kind of been an underwhelming.
It's been pretty laid back this year, to say the least.
Yeah, even though the JTWC forecasts it to remain a tropical storm for the next 5 days, it only forecasts its maximum sustained winds to be 45 knots. It says that for the next 2.5 days, the storm will only be at 40 miles an hour. If you actually look at the satellite imagery that we have on the system right now, it's going to be in the top right of the satellite imageries that we have. The storm is sheared incredibly. If I were to show visible imagery of the system, the center is fully exposed to wind shear with only a little bit of convection to the southwest. You have that kind of just flare-up blob of convection that it has there, and nothing else really to back it up. The thing is, though, if it somehow doesn't get ripped apart completely by shear, like the JTWC says, that they think it will get into, I think it's the Yellow Sea between South Korea, North Korea, and China as a tropical storm to potentially threaten land there. I know the GFS right below my face has it impacting South Korea as a tropical storm, which is kind of interesting to see. Otherwise, other than that, though, the system isn't really something that, should really be noted for, just because it's really sheared apart. But regardless, rain is the most dangerous factor of a storm usually. Rain and flooding, because that is what causes 90% of the deaths and usually the most damage with hurricanes and tropical systems. So that should always be a thing keeping in track.
You'd expect with one region being very quiet, you'd think that there'd be another region that compensate for the inactivity, but in this case, almost if not all the basins have been performing poorly.
Yeah, it's just, we haven't, Hector was really intense. We've seen a lot of activity. We have technically 4 basins active right now, which is, kind of crazy to see that much active at one time in the year. I think David's saying what we haven't really mentioned yet. There's actually 2 other invests in the Western Pacific as well. David, do you want to bring those up?
Yes, we have, I think, a tropical cyclone alert. Where are we? Okay, we have tropical storm 18W, and the local name is Yagi. So that's tropical storm 18W, and we also have invest 96W. Yagi, there's the Joint Typhoon Warning Center's current chart. I haven't had a chance to look at these systems, so there's the chart. I'll leave that on the screen, and we'll have a look at the information.
Yeah, Yagi has kind of stalled and stayed in a pretty similar spot for the past 2 days. They are expecting it to get a move on at this point. But it's interesting to see a storm that will remain at such a weak intensity while surviving for the next 5 days if their forecast is right. To see a tropical storm maintain only 40-mile-an-hour sustained winds for 3 days straight, as they're trying to say, is really interesting, to say the least.
Strat, now I've got the technical information. It's 462 nautical miles west-southwest at UA2, tracking north-northeast at 8 knots. The initial position is based with fair confidence based on animated enhanced infrared satellite imagery, which depicts a exposed low-level circulation center, deep convection shear to the west. This is supported by a 36 gigahertz image, which shows shadow banding wrapping into the low-level circulation, deep convection over the western quadrant, and the initial intensity is 35 knots based on the Vorak, and the Yagi, I don't know whether it's a male or female. Anyway, Yagi is tracking along the northern periphery of a weak near equatorial ridge to the south, and 18W will continue to track northward over the next 24 hours as the primary steering influence transitions to the south to a subtropical ridge to the northeast. So again, it's the steering mechanism. However, 18W, according to the Joint Typhoon Warning Center, it's expected to intensify and
very slowly,
be gradually, yes, reaching 40 knots within 72 hours. And again, it's a complex steering environment. Dynamic model guidance is in poor agreement as they differ on when the steering wedge will take over as the dominant steering influence and on the strength and position of the ridge. And we could say the same about Typhoon Shanshan.
Yeah. There's a quick question in chat that I want to address quickly before we get back to the Western Pacific. Someone's asking again if Hector became a Category 5. I'd like to iterate for everyone here that Hector did not become a Category 5 storm. It was close at a point last night, but it did not reach the satellite imagery that it really needed or recon information collected required for it to be classified as a Category 5 storm. It was close, but it didn't get there. Do you mind pointing out a bit about 96W? Because it's actually, if you look at right below my face cam, it's going to be on the far left of that Western Pacific forecast model. You can see it form as a system there in the really far left, just off screen, moving into southern China. Do you have any information about that?
96W. I'll just see if I can bring up.
because
Okay,
it's
I've got the floaters, so that might help. And I'm
Well,
just bringing it up.
yes, Cesar.
yeah, sorry, I'm watching some models of 96W, and they predict a very erratic track of the system, practically all surrounding that island. I sorry for not knowing the
It's
name of
Hainan Island. I didn't. I didn't know
Hainan
until
Island.
recently either.
That
Yeah, it
makes
will
two of us.
practically it will surround Hainan Island for, well,
Multiple
during all
days.
its life, practically all its life, at least in the next 5 days. Um, it's expected to, well, really I don't know the intensity forecast of the system, but I think they classify as a tropical storm in the next days. Right now, of course, doesn't look anything like that. I mean, the
Hmm.
vortex is there, very exposed, of course. Is struggling a lot, I believe, with lots and lots of wind shear. And the imagery of this system, practically, it's all the evidence we have that this system is very very unlikely to form, at least in the next day as well. It looks very very bad. Actually, the vortex is so weak, there's almost no circulation, but the NHC thinks it will develop as a tropical storm, and it will take a very very unusual track. It will make landfall near Hong Kong, I believe, and then it will turn to the west southwest.
Yeah, it's
And
interesting. The track forecast for 96W's very similar in a certain sense to Suntin, which last month actually formed as a weak system um, over the Philippines, moved into the South China Sea by Hainan Island, moved into
it's
moved into Vietnam and dissipated, then came back out in the Hainan Sea, meandered there for about 4 days, regenerating into another tropical system, a weak one at it, and basically stalled out in this area for quite a while. These models try to bring it here for at least 4 or 5 days as well. Most of the GFS ensembles actually, let me take another look at them quickly. The GFS ensembles try to keep it here for 8 days, which is really surprising to say the least.
exactly.
It's hard for them to get a real track on it just because the storm is so elongated. It has so many vorticities at this point that it can't really get a lock on where it is, and that might make it harder for it to really forecast where it's going, which may be why it shows that up on the models, but it could be other things. David, actually, just briefly there, can you go back to that vorticity image that you had, David?
The A50 millibar vorticity, you can clearly see Shan up the northern, and you've got
Yeah,
Yagi,
Yagi.
and you've got 96 W over there, and is going to impact I think, Vietnam.
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, you can see
To
96W
the
there.
south of Hanoi. So, once again, it's Vietnam. They're in for another. Well, it's a tropical storm, and it's only a week or two since the last one, and flooding was a major issue. I believe life was lost, but I would have to come back to that in a update.
Yeah, I was gonna say there was a lot of rain in that region from Sontin, so
Yep, and looks like
having
they're
this
going
system
to
won't help. And you can tell right
get some more.
now, even though most of the convection is situated to the south and west of the system, or just west in general of the system, it's still broad. You can tell by looking at that vorticity that was there before that. It's not really centralized yet. That's why there's so many different vorticities, but it shows a wide area of turning in the atmosphere, and that can lead to a broader area of thunderstorm activity in general, which for an area that's already experienced a lot of rain in the past month is not good to see at all. I know there's also 97W.
Yeah.
Do you mind taking a look at that as well, David?
97W.
If you look at the computer model right below my webcam, you can actually see that the GFS develops 97W into a typhoon that makes landfall a bit south of Shanghai. So it's interesting to see how active the tropics became all of a sudden when initially when we were all looking at what it might be like when Nathan was on vacation a week or so before we left, and nothing was really showing up, and now this happens to be arguably the most active point of the year up to this point. So here's 97W on screen share.
97 sea surface temperature, not an issue. And this is the RGB color and the water vapor.
Yeah, I think what is that? I think its enemy right now is wind shear, if I'm not mistaken. If you want to try to pull up that graphic quickly.
Quickly, I want to relay this information to you. You may have not heard it before, but apparently 4 deaths have been contributed to Tropical Storm Elena, or Elena. I don't know how you say that. Ileana. 4 of them have been contributed to the storm. 3 of them were apparently due to flooding, and 1 due to rip currents near Acapulco, Mexico. So I just wanted to relay that information if you guys didn't know that. But 4 deaths have been recently accounted for.
That's information we didn't have, and it's really sad to hear. That's one of the reasons we really do this, is to make sure that people have as much information as possible so that we can try to help people avoid those kind of situations. So it's always really sad to hear when that kind of stuff happens, really. And you really want to make sure that hopefully with the information that we provide, we can at least help one person. That's really what we want to do. And going back to 97W, David just showed the wind shear map quickly, and right where 97W is, it looks like there's incredibly high wind shear. Cesar, you were going to say something?
Yeah, I was watching the wind shear layer map, and basing on its current location, 97W is under practically nil wind shear.
Is it at nil?
But basing in its current location, it is, and it's decreasing. But of course, there are very high amounts of wind shear around the system. Practically 97W is in the point where there's no wind shear. But who knows? To be honest, I don't know if this map or layer is out of date.
The oldest it'd be is 6 hours.
Well, the image I'm watching, that is the most recent shear layer, it was at 21 UTC.
21 UTC. So that's about 4 hours old at this point.
Yeah, practically it is. So who knows? And of course, the 2 systems, Yagi, that is under moderate wind shear and increasing to its south and southwest, and of course Shanshan with very low levels of wind shear and decreasing on its north but increasing on its south.
And the storm is going to start increasing its movement to the northeast as well, Shanshan. So its time is really limited as it starts to move into cooler waters, and the increased forward motion of the storm is going to eventually start to displace convection as well. That's why weakening is forecast dissipation in a few days, if I'm not mistaken. I will check the JTWC forecast track right now. They dissipated in about a little less than 3 days right now at 40 knots. They expected to maintain typhoon status a bit longer before weakening as it starts to move away from Japan. Let's see.
I've got on the screen, sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
I have the Japanese Meteorological Agency website. You can see the tracks on the left-hand side. You can also see, I think it's 90 tropical storm Yagi. So the central pressure, I think, is around 994. So they have it maintaining at 995, sorry, 994 millibars intensity, but that one we'll keep an eye on. Now we've got Shanshan, still typhoon, as we've said. I think 975 millibars.
And just note that gale wind radius of at least 30 knots sustained winds is very large. You know, it covers a wide swath of Japan. You know,
It does.
a good quarter of the country, or at least a fifth of the country, you could say. The most populous area, of course, being the Tokyo metropolitan area, is completely covered in gale force winds, and you see, based on that graphic, typhoon sustained winds on the very edge of some of the coastline there. So even though, fortunately, most of the convection has actually stayed off to the east side, as it makes its closest approach right now, some of that convection is curving over, and you will see worsening conditions in the current path just to the west of where the storm is.
And I'll just come back to the local warnings.
Those are all typhoon warnings, right?
Red, high waves. What else? So it's just mainly the coastal regions, dense fog, and the high waves. So the picture for the local warnings has decreased. I would remind reviewers to just have a look at the last couple of updates on Shanshan. Due to the rainfall, the ground was becoming very, very soft, so they issued a advisory. That's actually
Japan has
not
received
included.
a lot of rain lately, really a lot. It was experiencing already devastating floods in the southern part of the island, mostly in July, and having two typhoons get very close approaches and or landfalls within 2 weeks of each other after a really, really bad early July, when the whole island, the whole country has ground that's pretty softened up at this point, is not good to see at all. And going off of that a little bit, just to another topic, we have a question in chat asking about El Nino this year. I know last time I checked, the forecast long range was saying neutral or weak El Nino. Has that changed at all? Do you guys know if El Nino
sure about
forecast
that.
has changed?
Well, I think there's like an equal level of I mean, nothing like it's not El Nino or La Nina. I'm not sure, to be honest.
Just like a neutral.
Yeah, I know the models, long runs, were saying a low chance of La Nina, and then I think they were saying about a 30% chance of an El Nino, probably a weak one, and then mostly 50 to 60% were saying it'd be a neutral over the next 5 to 6 months. But it is important to note, at least for the Atlantic Ocean, that with a weak El Nino or a neutral leaning El Nino phase with the really apparent Saharan air layer, it's really nice to see a season in the Atlantic that has been mostly hindered to this point per se. It's obviously much less devastating than last year right now, which is really nice to see, and we're hoping it's going to hold up. The problem is with the current setup for this season, I think that's been highlighted in multiple forecasts. Force 13's forecast included, is that activity this year will probably be higher than normal off the East Coast and in the northwestern Atlantic Ocean, which does provide a potential threat to the East Coast of the United States, which a lot of the population is located in. I think that's, the big risk to keep track of at the moment. David's
And
actually Go ahead.
Oh, expanding off of the Atlantic. I don't know if we talked about Debby. I don't think I was here if you guys did. But
We talked about it briefly, but we can go back to it. Its satellite imagery is in the top left, and you can clearly see decreasing convection that's becoming more and more displaced from the center.
Yeah, because it's heading into, right now it's in somewhat favorable winds here, but it's going to start heading into more higher winds here, about 25 knots increasing as it goes on over. Winds are about 40 miles per hour, I believe, the last advisory I checked.
I think the thing is not just unfavorable wind shear, but it's going to be heading over very cool water as well. It was able to form because, it managed to come over an area of lower shear and then more than enough warm water to maintain itself, but it was stated in the initial advisory that Debby was expected to be short-lived because it was going to move into unfavorable conditions. It's actually survived a little bit longer than they expected, if I'm not mistaken, but don't hold me to account on that.
Yeah, and quickly going over Hector, looking at radar here, looks like it has two concentric eye walls or double eye walls right now.
Yeah, I'll pull the because Hector is one of the big storms that we're covering right here. This is the radar. You're right, it does have two eye walls. It looks like it's about to undergo an eye wall replacement cycle. Right?
It's been looking like that for the past few hours yet, but the innermost eye wall seems to be kind of eroding a little bit.
Yeah, if just looking at the radar, it seems the eastern part of the eye wall in general is cracking and is becoming more exposed right now. If you're looking at the stream, you'll be able to see that. Cesar, you were going to say something?
Yes, I was saying that I think it had an eye wall replacement cycle recently, but of course its intensity will be like fluctuating between below major hurricane status or high category 2 system, and Hector is now surviving its travel in the south of Hawaii, and if it crosses the international date line, I think it will be the first to do so since 26? No, 2015. If I'm not wrong.
How long, I think?
I think it will be like 3 years. I think the last time to cross from the Central Pacific to the West Pacific Basin was a Central Pacific storm. I don't remember the name.
And I think
I think it was Halon or something.
No,
or is it
Kilo was after Halola, but I don't remember if there was a storm after Kilo.
And I think something else to keep in track is that it's been even longer since we've seen a storm cross from the Eastern Pacific all the way to the Western Pacific, and then maintain hurricane status the whole time as well.
Well, to maintain hurricane status and cross the three basins, I think the last one was John.
And John is a really well-known storm because of its feats that it's done during its lifetime.
But if we don't get too strict about hurricane status, the last storm to ever cross the three basins was Genevieve in 2014.
Yeah, that is true.
So those are pretty interesting points to take, or data. I don't know how to call it.
Yeah,
but it's interesting what we are watching about Hector. And actually, do you remember, guys, that some models predicted that that was like it was a possible direct landfall in Hawaii. So fortunately, it didn't happen. But
Yeah, it's
and
fortunate that it stayed to the south. But we still got tropical
it
storm warnings in some effects, which is pretty rare to see on a main Hawaiian
yeah,
island. Because, they're small in
exactly.
size and pretty isolated, and especially geographically, they're in the middle of a wide ocean, and,
They're in the middle of nothing.
yeah,
but
closest thing to them is Midway Islands. It's pretty far.
but
We're gonna have to end the stream soon, so do you guys want to do a quick recap on any of the storms that you guys want to talk about?
well, just to
Sure.
just to
Right.
recapitulate some storms. Of course, we have very much activity in this week. We have Tropical Storm Debby in the Atlantic. I think it's going to start its ex-tropical
I think it
transition
already
soon.
has, really. Looking at the latest
Oh,
frames, it's looking very not
well,
impressive.
the circulation is displacing very fast to the northeast. We have, of course, Hurricane Hector making history. Hurricane John that absorbed Tropical Storm Ileana and is now weakening as well. We have Kristy, that is not expected to be a significant storm, so nothing to do. Shanshan, I think the most important storm in terms of re- of live risks and places to be affected. In this case, Japan, Shanshan, very very close to make landfall or even making landfall in the northeast part of Japan. Pretty interesting storm. It's about to start its extra tropical transition as well.
Yep.
Yagi, a new system have formed. Very very sheared storm, very bad organized, and it's expected to not
But
intensify a lot. And the two new invest as well.
Yeah, Isaac,
Highest
what do you have to say? Isaac, what do you have to say about this?
I was going to say quickly, Chan is moving away from its Chan is moving away from the Japanese coast right now, and so far rain hasn't been too bad. Most of it stayed on the eastern.
That's pretty good news
Yeah,
for
I
the
think Isaac
people
just
in
cut off,
Japan.
but he was saying how it's fortunate that most of the convection has stayed to the east of the island. It is fortunate to see some of it's wrapping around right now as it parallels the coast for the next 6 to 12 hours before booting it off to the northeast. But it's fortunate to see overall that the storm has actually had the worst of its rainfall stay offshore. Marcel, what do you have to say
About what?
about just the whole situation in general right now? We have 6 active storms. What do you want to say to recap about them before we go offline?
So we have Hector that's a storm that we could expect to that we can expect to to say to maintain in the long term. Yagi that this be a very sure storm and not very nice. And Kristy and John that are weakening and they're and that are in the end of its life. And Chan Chan that it's affecting right now the Japan.
All right, David, any last words you want to say?
Well, the sea continues to be very active. We've got 97W,
He's gone.
96W.
Never mind.
Oh, you got me?
Yeah, we got you.
Okay. Straight, we will continue to bring the latest information. I think it's a very fluent scene over here in the Westpac. I'm hoping I will be able to capture some more footage of the International Space Station flying over these two Westpac systems, but the rainfall factor, I know we haven't really focused on that. And I think the big island over there in Hawaii has dodged a bullet. I'm being quite frank, and
Yep.
so mainly it's Shanshan and Yagi and 97W. And as we said a few minutes ago, it's the people of Vietnam. They're in for another bad period.
Yeah. All right. Well, everyone, that's going to wrap it up for this session, a live stream of Force 13 coverage on a very busy Northern Hemisphere tropics right now. 6 active systems, 2 invests as well. One of them expected to develop in the next couple of days. Thank you guys again for coming out. Make sure to check out our YouTube channel right here. Subscribe if you haven't already. We have Facebook and Twitter as well. Check us out there, Force 13. Also, consider helping us out financially as well. You know, we are nonprofit. We run fully on external funds and haven't had any external funding until very recently with the opening of our Patreon. That's going to be also in the description with the other links I mentioned in chat right now. So make sure to check us out on all these platforms. Maybe subscribe, keep track of us. We do provide information constantly. With all these systems around, we have been having multiple video updates a day right now, even though Nathan is away courtesy of David. Really appreciate him doing all that work. So, thanks again for watching, everyone. Have a great night.
Bye for now.
Night.
It's Force 13's Music Collection 20.